Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to introduce this webinar, which is hosted by CercleS, and it is about a research that was recently carried out in the CercleS community among its members, all the language centers of the CercleS community. First of all, let me give you some technical rules. Can you please stay mute, your microphones mute during the webinar? If you have any questions, can you please ask them in the chat rather, and then I will oralize your questions at the end to the speakers, and perhaps we will have time for some questions, oral questions, I mean, at the end, but we will see. I just wanted to introduce the working group. Yeah, okay, so here on this slide, you have the photos of all the people that participated to this working group on the research. So Sabina Schaffner, CercleS president, who was the coordinator of the working group. Dr. Nebojša Radić, I'm not sure I pronounce it correctly, sorry for my pronunciation. He's from the University of Cambridge. Isabella Stefanuti, who is from the University of Bath. Dr. Katarina Zamborova, who is from Bratislava, and Dr. Ruth Tobias, who is from the Freie University in Berlin. So I'll now hand over to Sabina, who will start the webinar.
So yes, I would also like very much to welcome you to this webinar in the name of the working group. And I would also like to mention and express my thanks to the working group for all the effort invested into creating the survey, developing the questionnaires, and also in analyzing the results. So we are very happy to have the chance to present to you some selected main outcomes today. And it will be interesting to compare the teachers' and the managers' perspectives, and as well to identify some first challenges for future language teaching and learning in higher education. So, of course, it is, one could ask oneself, why should we have another survey about the pandemic? You might have come across many surveys, you might have been invited to take part in surveys, but we are sure that it is important to have carried out this one by CercleS because it is really a Europe-wide range being covered. We have got responses from both teachers and managers, so we get different perspectives. The focus is specifically on teaching in higher education, which is not the case in some other surveys being carried out. We have got many open text questions and a lot of answers. So we have really had the chance to get insight into teachers and managers' experience and their reflection on that experience. And we are sure that it is a topic with a large impact on the future of language education in our field of higher education. Let me just give you an overview of the webinar content. So I am going to start to give you some overall information about the survey, and I will then be handing over to Nebojša Radić in his section, Changes in Professional Practice. He will show some insight into experience of teachers and managers. He will be followed by Isabella Stefanuti, who is going to present main outcomes in the section Lessons Learned, also from the perspective of both teachers and managers. And then she will be followed by Ruth Tobias, who is going to present results in the section Future of Language Teaching and Learning. Katarina Zamborova will later on present to you the first challenges we identified we should kind of keep in mind and follow up, which are of importance for our future. And I will wrap up the presentation by giving some outlook on further action prepared by CercleS to follow up the webinar and to follow up the results of the survey. Some of you might have taken part in the survey, And you can see that on the left-hand side, we have the teacher's questions, and on the right-hand side, we have the manager's questions. And you can see the three sections: change in professional practice, then lessons learned, and the future of language learning and teaching in higher education. So whereas in the first and the third section, we have almost identical issues being covered, in the second sections, we have very specific different issues. It is, of course, linked also to the different roles of both teachers and managers. So let me start giving you an overview of the results of the survey. Well, the survey was open on the 30th of March and it was closed on the 5th of May. It was sent to all our members, so institutional members and associate members, for further dissemination among their teaching and management staff. We've got a very good response rate. In the teacher survey, we've got 725 responses, and from the manager's side, 183. We could use all data, and all data was used in an anonymous way. And it is very nice as we got responses from all institutional members and almost all associate members. So we can say that we have a well-distributed range of respondents. So, but one can also state that in both surveys, some of the institutional members are overrepresented, whereas others are underrepresented. So the top respondents on descending order by country are, for the teacher survey, the UK, Italy, Germany, Spain, and Switzerland. And for the manager's survey, the UK, Germany, Spain, and Italy. We have also consulted a statistician, and we are happy to state that from a statistical point of view, both surveys are representative for our population. We can state that with a probability of even 99%, the result of the survey is true for the teachers, with a margin of error of 5% for the entire population. It's a little bit less, the probability, it's only 90%, but it's also still very high for the manager's survey. So we have also chosen to be on the safe side, a population side which is on the lower of our estimate, so 6,000 teachers and 400 managers. So, but overall, we are very happy to say, yes, their survey results are representative, and we can also really use them as a starting point for further analysis and discussion. Well, this pie chart shows all the members of CercleS, and you can see the sizes of the different members are, of course, different. These are the national associations and also the associate members. And it will be interesting later on to see to what degree the different associations are represented in the survey. Yes, this is the teachers' response rate, shown also in a pie chart. And you can see that there are some countries which are clearly overrepresented and other underrepresented. It's interesting to see some of the smaller countries and also organized in smaller associations are overrepresented. This is the case for the Czech Republic, Switzerland, and Poland. There are some bigger associations and bigger countries represented bigger associations, as France and Spain are underrepresented. So we have a somewhat similar but slightly different picture for the manager's response rate. If we look at this pie chart, we can see also that some countries are overrepresented. In this case, this is true for the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Germany. And again, France and Spain are countries which are underrepresented. Well, from a statistical point of view, one could state that the results of the survey are probably very true for the ones, for the countries and associations which are equally represented or even overrepresented. They might be a little bit less true or adequate for the countries which are underrepresented. But we will also give access to the data from the national associations for their population, so they could still also use and compare later on to what degree these results might look different with regard to their teachers and managers. Now, if you look at the place of work of both teachers and managers, we can state that most of teachers and managers work in a language center, so a unit specifically dealing with language education. A smaller group is working in a department with a degree program and or in both institutions at the same time. The role in the institution, we can say that for the teachers, most of the teachers are really language teachers or lecturers. Some, and these are smaller groups, are professors in the field of language teaching and education, or consultants in a self-access center. When we look at the managers, we can say that most of them have a managerial director role, and lesser groups are professors with managerial duties or program coordinators within a language center. It is also very interesting to see the employment situation of the respondents. If you look at the teachers graph, you can see that most of the teachers responding to the survey have a permanent contract. The bigger group, even a full-time permanent contract, some of them a part-time permanent contract. So one could state that other teacher groups, also as freelance teachers, are less represented in the survey, and it's probably also important to know when analyzing the results. On the managerial side, I think it makes sense that managers usually have a permanent contract, most of them a full-time permanent contract. So this is the default result. And then we also asked about when people started working differently. And you can see that for the most responses were in the field of mid-March somewhere. So some of them had started earlier, and smaller groups told us that they started in late March or even after March. Okay, this is just as an introduction with some background information about the results of the survey, and I'm now handing over to Isabella Stefanutu, who is going to share her insights into changes in professional practice.
It's actually me, I think, Sabina.
I'm sorry, yes, it's Nebojša. Yes, I was so upset by the change of slides. Okay, yes, I'm sorry, I'm handing over to Nebojša Radić. Yes.
Very well. Thank you, Sabina. Thank you. Well, who is now operating the slides? Sabina, can we move to the next one? Yes, I will be talking about changes in professional practice. So our questions 9, 10, depending on which of the two surveys for teachers or managers we are looking at, but the results are on the same page, was this. At this critical time, in which way did you feel that your university and or your management provided you with adequate training and ongoing support? So that was the question. And if you look at the map up here, dark red is definitely disagree. And to the right, dark blue is definitely agree. Okay. So in general, teachers and managers rated the support in a very similar, comparable way. There are no discrepancies. Managers felt better equipped with hardware than teachers, and both teachers and managers felt that there was not much relief from other duties. Less than half of both groups respondents said that they experienced encouragement and recognition. It is interesting to note that here at the bottom, this is probably more the case with managers than teachers. Next one, Sabina, please. Question 11 related to what support did you receive from your immediate team? And I would like to stress here immediate, because there is another question which relates to the wider community within the university. So kind of support you received from your immediate team, example from colleagues and management. You can choose more than one answer, so they don't add up to 100%, okay? More than one answer was possible. So support meetings followed by peer training are the ones highlighted as default forms of team support for both teachers and management. So there is a correspondence again here when we compare the answers of teachers and managers. In some cases, no support was offered, but that was a small number of colleagues, but there were such cases where people reported no support offered or existing. Next one, Sabina, please. Question 13. Could you please rate, starting from the most difficult, how challenging it was for you to deal with the following aspects of the pandemic? So this is the one, this is the teachers' responses. So again, dark red is first choice, okay? So that would be the most difficult, and dark blue would be last choice, least difficult, okay? So number one, most difficult, coping with an increased workload. So that was highlighted as number one. Number two, coping with stress and uncertainties. 3, lack of knowledge about online teaching. So we could say that this was kind of predictable. This is probably what we said as well. So no surprise there. One, to me at least personally, surprising result is at the bottom. If we have a look, fear of losing my job came bottom. So half of the respondents placed it as last choice. If you have a look at the dark blue at the bottom, which I at least thought was encouraging, that at least people did not fear for losing their jobs in a general atmosphere of fear of people losing their jobs. If you can move to the next one, Sabina, please. So this was about the teachers. Now, this is the same question asked to managers. Could you please rate, starting from the most difficult, how challenging it was for you to deal with the following aspects? Exactly the same answers. Have a look. The number one, coping with increased workload. Number two, coping with stress and uncertainties. Number three, lack of knowledge about online teaching. And at the very bottom, again, fear of losing my job. So this, obviously, there is a correspondence between the answers given by teachers and managers, which is probably good, which means that there is team spirit and that people worked in unison. Sabina, if you could go back now one slide, please. Yes. So starting from the most useful, what resource did you find most useful? So this is for teachers, and first choice, dark red, the online support organized spontaneously by my peers. So support by peers best aligned to specific needs. Is it a testimony of culture of exchange, support, collaboration? If we have a look at this chart, it shows us actually that the more specific the support, the more appreciated it was. It is interesting to note that this is the one that relates to teachers, but if we see the comment at the bottom, managers rank the resources identically. So again, there is a correspondence between teachers, as we mentioned, as Sabina mentioned at the beginning, 725 responses from teachers and 183 from managers. And as we have seen so far, there are no discrepancies in their answers. Next one, Sabina, please. Yep, thank you. Changes in professional practice. How would you describe your teaching practice in spring, summer 2020? You can choose more than one answer. Overwhelmingly, no surprise there, online remote teaching. So 600 people out of 725 chose online remote. There were other options. Second more popular option was web enhanced face-to-face in virtual learning environment, which again is not unpredictable. But online remote as a mode of delivery was obviously the favorite. We were in lockdown, social distancing, and that was the favorite mode of delivery. And the next one, please. were the learning outcomes of your courses achieved? So what did we think about the achievements of our students? Yes, was the response of 448 teachers. Again, there was 725 responses, so this represents 66.3%. So 66% of us thought that we did achieve the outcomes. 9 said no, which is around 11%, whereas 37% thought it was partially. Now, partially is an interesting category because we might argue that partially means no. So you either achieve or you don't achieve. However, there is a kind of interesting gray zone here because partially also might mean, given the circumstances, we did do a good job, but we did not. But when compared to the previous year or previous years, we did not quite achieve these goals. And the next one, please. Give us more details about your answer to question 16, teach. Okay. So yes, these are some examples of answers given by teachers. I've changed the pedagogical idea of my course so the goals could be met. Since most of my courses have been organized around blended learning, autonomous self-study activities, the lockdown and pandemic has not really changed my teaching. Then I moved all my materials to Moodle. I created some extra materials to make it possible for students to do online remote classes. I assessed the process and the products. We had no problem achieving outcomes. And finally, the last one, weaker students would need definitely more face-to-face communication. The online form was not efficient enough. And that is probably one of the themes coming out of the online remote delivery of the courses, that for weaker students, it does not work as well as for the top students in the class. Next one, Sabina, please. What relevant rules and regulations, if any, were modified during this period? You can choose more than one answer. This was for managers. So this was the data, and it was confirmed by the open-ended comments. There was nothing in the open-ended comments that was different from what was offered here. So work conditions changed. So that was the top answers. Yes, we work from home. Attendance requirements for students and for staff changed. A number of students per class changed. Classes were downsized. That is one of the responses we got most often. I don't remember there was one single response where classes were increased in numbers. Accessibility and diversity came bottom. However, we need to comment a little bit on that. A number of colleagues did not understand the question, so we know that because of their open-ended responses. So it could be the issue could be that it's called something different in different institutions or countries, or that is not as much a salient point, is not as highlighted as a priority as in some other institutions. So just something to keep an eye on. Next one, Sabina, please. And finally, please comment on your answer to question 16, managers. It's about leadership, high number of online meetings. Everybody reported that we had more meetings than before. And interestingly enough, it is also the nature of these meetings, because these were mostly, in a way, formal meetings, because you need to make a time, you need to get online, you have an agenda, which is different from just meeting people on the corridor. Introduction of flexible working hours, and leadership became observable, okay, became important. Key decisions were to be taken. And key decisions often were taken by steering groups and cascaded down to staff at the level of university. Universities set up central COVID committees and technical support units, dissemination of information, communication, and networking patterns. More administration processes moved to a digital and online format. One thing, however, that we have noticed is, despite this top-down approach to management during the emergency period, no one complained about this style of management top down. So no complaints were registered. It was just a matter of fact stated that that was the case. And next one, Sabina, please. Which brings me to the end of my section, so I can announce Isabella Stefanutti, who will be telling us about lessons learned.
Thank you, Nebiosha. That's great. So now I'm bringing you forward in time because at this stage, at this part of the survey, we ask people to reflect on what they've learned from the COVID-19 experience. And if you remember what Sabina said at the beginning, this is probably the part where the questionnaires for teachers and managers were the most different, because to reflect the different challenges and the priorities of the two groups. And so I will start with the teachers' answers, and then we'll move on to the manager ones. And then we can move on to the next slide. Now, question 21, we asked teachers to compare face-to-face teaching to online remote synchronous teaching. And we gave quite a lot of options there, but we didn't want to inflict all of them on you because otherwise there would be so many. We just selected the top answers and the last answer. So the very first place answer from the respondents is that teaching online takes more time. And that probably doesn't surprise you. But sadly, the answer they got the least approval is that students show more satisfaction from the teaching. So the usual correlation between hard work and student satisfaction in this case did not work. Sad. The other top answers relate to group work, which is, again, quite understandable given the interactions and working with peers that we usually do in our language classes. And if you can see, even if breakout rooms are considered very effective by 70% of the respondents, there is the realization that actually group dynamics are more difficult online and that the group dynamics are less diverse online. And then we can move on to the next slide. In the next slide, and if you paid attention to the previous slide, you notice that the fourth highest answers wasn't presented. And this is because it was an observation about speaking skills. In question 22, we ask teachers to reflect on student success in acquiring the 4 language skills. And if you can see from the answers, the blue is negative and the red is positive. You can see that actually reading, writing, and listening skills did not seem to be too affected. In fact, it did not seem to be affected negatively from learning online. However, the speaking skills seem to have been negatively affected from learning online, which again, probably shouldn't surprise us that much. And you can also notice the big chunk of gray area there, where teachers couldn't really determine whether the learning of the skills was affected in a positive way or in a negative way. And we will need to investigate this further. Is this because they had not noticed any difference between online learning and face-to-face learning, or because it is too early now to comment on it? So, question for the next survey. So let's move on to the next slide. And then if you can see here in question 25, we ask teachers to agree or disagree with some statements that we asked them. And if you remember, one of the very hot topics at the end of last semester, sorry, not last semester, the end of the academic year, last year, was assessment. And you can see that the majority of respondents had to alter the assessment format for their courses, but also that people didn't really think that validity or reliability of the assessment was compromised by the change of format. Again, yeah, there's some quite a bit of gray area where respondents couldn't really decide whether the reliability and the validity of the assessment was affected by the changes that were done. And again, we should investigate this further. Is this because maybe assessment wasn't present in the courses that the respondents taught, or is it because they don't know or they don't have an opinion? So let's move on and see the next question we ask to teachers, which is quite encouraging because this indicates the results on our question on learning outcomes and students' commitment. More teachers agreed than disagreed that the learning outcomes were as high with online teaching as with face-to-face teaching, and that and the same was remarked on students' commitment. So that's very good for the students' commitment and for the learning outcomes achieved, which was something that also Nebiosha noticed in the answers that he commented on. But again, a few of the respondents couldn't really decide and couldn't really comment on this topic. And then we move on now to the next slide, which will introduce the lessons learned by managers. And as I mentioned, the questions that we asked managers were quite different from the questions that we asked teachers, just to reflect the fact that the responsibilities and the challenges were a bit different. So if we move on to the next slide, we ask managers to reflect on their teams and to see what they noticed in their teams as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, if there was any changes in the teams. And again, this result fits very well in what Nebiosha was commented earlier, because most managers have noticed, in fact, the majority, quite a big majority of managers learn that staff are quite stressed. And, but very nicely, not only, well, it's not nice that staff are stressed, but what is nice is that what managers also noticed is the strong support that staff show to each other, and the mutual solidarity and mutual support at a difficult time. It's really nice, and then also, given the role, the third biggest area of concern for managers at the time of COVID, and now if we continue teaching online, is the difficulty in supervising the quality of teaching. Then we can move on to the next slide, which is, again, understandably, another concern for managers is making sure that the staff receive relevant and timely communication. And so in question 21, we ask our respondents to reflect on communication. And both consider communication both on business needs and then on human needs, particularly knowing that stress and uncertainty was quite a problem for staff, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. And overall, video conferencing was considered an effective tool to communicate business needs. However, working remotely seemed to have had an impact on informal communication and on team spirit. So in one way, business needs then was okay, and remote working didn't really affect that too much. However, maybe the human side of our departments have been affected more. And because we were quite interested in this topic of communication, we asked managers to comment on this question 21, and we'll see some of the comments in the next slide. And I'll leave you a minute or so to read the comments that our respondents gave us. Okay, I'll move on, and I'll move on to the next slide. That, as you might know, especially if you had a personal experience of that, childcare has been particularly difficult during lockdown and during the lockdowns. And so we were really interested in finding out if universities or language centers offer support to parents. And again, encouragingly, this was nice to notice, is that most respondents indicated that some sort of support was offered, even if the range of the support offered varied quite a lot, from sometimes just merely showing flexibility with deadlines, and then to the other extreme, to hiring extra support for staff. And then if we move on to the next slide, you see the question 24. Again, when we were interested in finding out what steps were taken to look after the well-being of staff. Because, of course, as you are, we also are aware that lockdown has not been easy for the average person. So also here, we were quite encouraged to discover that most language centers and universities looked after the well-being of the staff, even if also here we had a very big range of support available. Some language centers or some universities could only offer regular communication, and some other language centers or university could be a bit more, show their care in a bit more generous way by sending small gifts to staff. So overall, we have quite an encouraging picture, and we are encouraged by the lessons that we learned by living through COVID. Language teachers and language center managers confirmed our assumptions that we're a community of hardworking professionals who care for each other and for their students. And so with this encouraging thought, I will now introduce you to my colleague, Ruth Tobias from Freie Universität Berlin, who will now present how the future looks like for our community of language practitioners.
Thank you very much, Isabella, for this encouraging talk, and I will try to see if the future can be also encouraging. First of all, future of language teaching and learning, what we learned from our survey is that both teachers and managers see the future in a quite bright light, but that the teachers are more focused perhaps on the opportunities on the didactical side of what we learned in the last month and in the last year in the different ways of delivering of language learning, and the managers are more focused on the challenges and the institutional questions that the future might bring. Next slide, please. First, we asked, thinking about yourself and your job, how do you see the future of language learning and teaching in higher education? And as you see, both from the pie charts from the teachers and from the managers, it is confirmed that the future is seen positively. Yeah, but from the managers, we see that the comments we asked are not confirming entirely this positive evaluation we see on these two charts. But first, we will come to the teachers' evaluation. Next slide, please. So here we put together the open comments. We got a total of 685 comments on the following topics, and we tried to rank them by frequency. So most of them are linked to didactical issues and evaluated in a very positive way. The future of language teaching and learning. Yeah, so the teachers were convinced that language skills will be important in the future too, that the new teaching skills were positively assessed, blended learning and hybrid learning are good ways of developing further language learning in higher education. Online learning versus face-to-face learning is not a contradiction. Yeah, it can be a combination. The more negative comments were based on job security and the workloads on the working conditions, extra amount of workload with little support. So for the future, support is a huge issue, but not much expectations on getting it, and the fear of losing the job as well. But as we've seen from the brochure's point, it is really something that is not predominant for the future. And of course, the financial aspects, and we've seen these comments especially from France and from the UK, the fear of cuts and closing down of institutions. Thank you. Next slide, please. As for the managers, the evaluation was not so positive. We got a total of 172 comments on the following topics. The support of language centers. Yeah, language centers might not get more financial support. The financial aspect, of course, this differs from country to country or language center to language center. Some language centers have to generate more income, others don't. And language centers will obviously have to cope with challenges the universities are confronted with within the pandemic and the post-COVID area that really is clearly making some changes on the university level as well. A huge question is recognition, and this is also seen not so in a not so bright light that the recognition and the rewards from university authorities for the effort and the coping with the situation and the challenges we as language center teachers and managers did can't be expected, awaited, and that we as language center management have to make ourselves heard at university level. But what is seen from the managerial side on the positive side is there's a lot of potential for development. So looking inside the language centers, the use of opportunities, showcase of best practices having been developed in the last month and year, and the use of new opportunities, blended learning, virtual exchanges, etc., etc. And of course, the team skills and development. We've talked about this already, about quick peer learning as an encouraging experience. Nebosha already showed the chart where peer learning was really mentioned as the best experience from change of practices. Okay, thank you. Next slide. Yeah, so we asked about the future, so about the changes which the teachers would like to see in the departments, and we offered some answers, and we've seen that more than half of the respondents are in favor of changes in the form of delivery of language teaching and learning, statements 1 and 2, so all in remote synchronous teaching formats and face-to-face courses. This obviously depending on the nature or content of the class, and offer in hybrid mode. But on the other hand, more than 1/3 of the respondents would prefer to go back to pre-COVID teaching, meaning presential teaching, face-to-face teaching statement. And now we would like to elucidate a bit these comments and these statements with some comments from the teachers. We have some slides. Now I will read always one of them, and then I will give you time to read the other ones. Here I've chosen the second one, yeah, to comment of the remote offer, the offer of remote synchronous teaching and face-to-face teaching. So the first statement we had on the previous slide For speaking skills and presentation skills, remote synchronous teaching is less stressful for shy students and easier to organize. It's a comment from France, and I will give you some time to read the other ones. Okay? Yes? So the next slide, please, for the second statement. The question 30, offer of course is in hybrid mode. We had several comments also in different languages, so we'll read the French one to change a bit. Les cours de langue ne sont pas que des cours de langue. Il est peu préférable de s'engager trop précipitamment dans la voie online car les échanges sociaux sont primordiaux pour les étudiants ainsi que pour les enseignants. Un juste milieu serait idéal avec 80% sur place et 20% de cours online synchrones pour les cours avancés. It's coming from Switzerland, and again, I will give you some time to read the other ones. Okay. Yes. I see Isabella, if she's saying yes. Okay, we will go on with the next slide and the comments about the last statement for question 30. No changes, please, just to return to pre-COVID teaching. They've chosen a comment from Germany. Ein Präsenzunterricht erscheint mir im Sprachunterricht unerlässlich. Berücksichtigung nonverbaler Signale, Einbeziehung des gesamten Kurses, Möglichkeiten differenzierten, stärker abgestuften Feedbacks, Möglichkeit zum Schaffen einer echten Gruppe. And once again, I will give some time to read the other two. Okay, so thank you. And then next slide, please. And moreover, over these 3 statements we gave teachers to comment, we got a very interesting comment, and I think it's a good conclusion or summary of what we learned with COVID crisis and where things might go. COVID-19 has shown 3 things. First, there are many new teaching formats possible that we use, even with current technology. Second, there are even more approaches imaginable, both online and face-to-face, if we had the technology, the framework, and the courage to try them. The pandemic, for all its sad effects, gave us a chance to take a step back and realize this. And third, nothing beats physical encounters. With all the new opportunities that we may have discovered, we should never, ever hope for remote teaching or remote collaboration to become the role. So I found this was a very good comment and a very good summary of what we lived through in the last months and where the way might go in this. And we showed you all this comments on this question because for us it was very important to show you the variety, the creativity, the possibility of our teachers to adopt to new situations, to create new learning settings, and to develop our language center learnings really further on and have these new ideas. So I hope you got at least a little idea of what we got in the comments, and thank you all for this. Well, coming back to the manager side, next slide, we are talking more about the challenges, not so much about the opportunities. We asked, we gave 4 statements. Well, the first, I think it's obvious, it's more than 70% agreed that the pandemic will have a long-lasting effect on language center services. Yeah, but the question is how these changes will affect us as language centers. Yeah, and I think it's no surprise that there's a lot of space in gray here, and neither agree or disagree. So the way further on has to be defined, and I think we as a working group have to have a closer look on this gray parts, and have to have further research on these questions, how the future can be developed by us. And here again, we have the question in the third statement, the question of recognition and support by university authorities. And once again, it's a not so positive view on the future for managers, so that the pandemic did not help really us as managers to get more recognition or more support or more rewarding on an internal level on the university. Yes, next slide, please. And we also asked the managers to comment on this, and we got 39 comments on the topics and 16 from the UK. So as I mentioned before, there might be a big issue or even more pressure than in other countries in the UK, and language centers being in discussion of having their future in an uncertain manner. Anyway, the achievements and value of language education not being recognized by university is one of the issues managers meant, and I got a quotation also from the UK saying in the achievements, I do not believe our university is particularly interested in supporting what we do explicitly or in rewarding us for what we do. They just expect us to get on with it. It will be up to us to capitalize on the changes that have taken place for our own sake and that of our learners. So there's a clear gap between what we're doing inside our language centers, for the future, and the way the external look within the university on what we are doing. So the perspectives are quite, how to say that, not pessimistic, but there are really challenges to develop. Further action, the positive side is we still have our sides to rely on us, and that's what we should do. That's the last comment I want to make here before giving over to my colleague Katharina for the challenges. Further action, so the idea is that language centers have to rely on their own potential for innovation and find recognition in themselves and what they are doing. The work with their teachers, as we've seen, a lot of achievements, a lot of innovation within the ways of teaching. And I will finish with the last citation and further action. From Switzerland, this one, it is important that language centers in higher education raise their voice and develop initiatives and a new practice without expecting support from their universities in the first place. Well, it's a bit of situation, at least from my point of view, we had before the pandemic, so no changes in the challenges for myself, but we developed a pair of specific challenges for coming up from the survey, and that's the end of my part. Thank you very much. I'm handing over to my colleague Katarina Zamborova from the University of Bratislava. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth. So hello again from Katarina from Slovakia, the University of Economics in Bratislava. And I will continue with challenges that we identified during our research. So one of the comment first says, our language center success and further innovation will be up to us, not the university. So it means that we all have to take as teachers and managers initiative and move forward and learn from the situation that we have to face and deliver the best teaching mode. And then to be more specific, we have 4 points that I'll concentrate on right now. The first one is to develop guidelines defining criteria for different formats of delivery in language education. As you know, we didn't have them because we all were thrown in emergency situation. Then we have to negotiate with the university executive boards with good conditions needed to carry out efficient and sustainable language teaching. For example, strategic and personal planning and technical support. Later, we have to offer, or there has to be offered training for sustainable online and hybrid teaching. And the last point that I'll mention is to maintain and develop international collaboration between language centers in higher education, such as virtual exchange, staff exchange, virtual international classroom. We all know that we have gone a long way, and it has been a very difficult time for us teachers and managers, but we want to be positive because we copied with the situation very well and we handle it. And our working group will continue with other activities you might be interested in, and Sabina will tell you more about them right now. So I'm handing it over to Sabina.
Yes, thank you very much, Katerina, and thank you to all colleagues for presenting some main outcomes. Yes, there is still a lot of work to do for us. As we mentioned at the beginning, we could show you only some main results. And since we have got a lot of dynamic texts, we will need more time to analyze them and look for correlations and getting a deeper understanding and assessment of all the feedback. We are going to write up a report, a short report about the main outcomes. There will also be an article in our CercleS journal, which will come out in autumn of this year about the survey. And then last but not least, for our whole community, we are planning to organize 2 workshops. One for teachers to kind of get a deeper understanding of the future challenges. So after having carried out more analysis of dynamic data, we would like to discuss some issues with some teachers at the workshop to understand, to get a more differentiated understanding of challenges, and then to be able to follow this up in developing later on, for example, workshops or trainings. And there will be another workshop prepared for managers where we would like to discuss a draft of a policy paper about different formats of language education and delivery in the context of higher education. So you might also be interested, and we are going to prepare these 2 workshops and inform about them, and also invite to take part in these 2 workshops. So with that, we have come to the end of our presentation, and we have now got time for comments or questions from your side. And I'm handing over to Anne, who has been so kind to follow the chat or pick up questions from the chat. And yes.
Sorry, yes, thank you very much, Sabina. And thank you very much to all the presenters and to the working group for such an important work. It was really interesting. For the moment, there are no real questions in the chat. If anybody has questions, please feel free to ask them directly, since for the moment there are no questions in the chat. Yes, Mark, please go on.
You may not be able to answer this question because it might be part of the further analysis, but have you observed any particular differences between national associations? UK, for example, is quite different in its language learning perspective compared to much of continental Europe.
So if I may just answer, yes, some of the differences we've come across is that the pressure on financial, performance and financial aspect was much, what was much more visible among the respondents from the UK. We also mentioned that during the presentation, and And also, so the overall pictures we got from the comments as for the future of language teaching and learning was less bright, one could say, than from other countries. But again, we really have to get a more deeper insight in comparison also with all other countries. But this was obvious at well, not only at the first glance, but reading through the comments, so and really calculating the comments on these different levels. But yes, I think, Mark, your question is one point which also should be then followed up in the first step by our analysis, but then also during a workshop, just to get more understanding of what is going on or how we can understand or contextualize the answers of the respondents with regard to their context and their university, they work in.
And thank you all for all the clear, hard work you've been doing.
There's another question coming from the chat. Well, I'm going to read it. I'm not sure whether the questionnaire permits to answer that, but anyway, the question is, which of the 4 skills has been greatly negatively or positively affected by the online mode of teaching? I don't know if you can perhaps give some elements about that.
So I think that Isabella, you showed that, yes?
Yes, I should. I should have slide. It's a very good question because there were a lot of gray areas, which meant neither agree nor disagree. And the answer is that the speaking skills seem to have been the one mostly affected by the online method of delivery. The other skills didn't seem to be that affected. However, there were a lot of people that didn't feel ready to comment, and we don't know why. We don't know whether that because they didn't notice any difference, or we don't know if they didn't really know how to comment on it. So it is a good question, but it's probably more gray as an answer. But in general, it's the speaking skills that have been noticed as the ones that suffer the most, which was also confirmed by some of the comments in the that we read, where some people said that actually a language class is to communicate, and then
And I think this is really a good example of how we could follow this up in a workshop, in coming even closer to what degree and why were the speaking skills, assessed as being more negatively affected. And there might also be some other answers because some people wouldn't think like that. So we would then get in, like discussing these results, selected results we find interesting with some of teachers from our community, we would get a more differentiated picture. And I think this is also important for us to follow up. I think it's a good example of what we could still, where we could still get a better insight and deeper knowledge.
Yeah, there's another question, quite a long question. Somebody says, many speakers today said they were not surprised with the outcomes. Is there anything that has surprised you all? That leads to a second question. I have the impression that if there are not many surprises, it seems all to boil down to asking financial support. Maybe it is just how I perceive it. What is your thought about that? And the person says, I can further explain orally if necessary. So I don't know if any of you can answer that.
Well, if I may just start, I think it is true that in general, there weren't so many surprises. There were some specific surprises though. I think we agreed upon in our group that still the perception in many cases, or the perception by managers and teachers were not so different. So this is perhaps a slight surprise. I mean, it was not obvious from the very beginning. Then I think it's perhaps not surprising because we knew it, but it is very worthwhile putting it forward, is that we've come across about very many resources on the side of teachers and also the side of managers, even more of teachers, and also goodwill in looking forward and going on and developing new approaches in language teaching. So we have a huge potential, and I think we as managers, we can really also, or we should perhaps even rely more and follow more up the potential we have among our teachers. And of course, I mean, as you all agree, financial issue stays important, and there perhaps in the policy paper we are going to draft, we will also have to find some arguments why the easy solutions in the sense of moving everything online, making it cheaper, is not a solution at all for language education. So yeah, that is a point. But I think that the survey also shows very encouragingly potential we have as a community and as institutions, as teachers and managers. Yes, Isabella?
Yes, one thing that we touched on very briefly yesterday when we were discussing the surprises is just the fact that we live through it, we live through the experience, and we come from different countries. So in one way, when we analyzed the results, we weren't surprised because our experiences are very varied, and yet they weren't that different in the COVID-19 times. So maybe that's an answer. One thing that surprised me and a bit saddened me is the fact that the challenges of the language centers are common everywhere. And I work in the UK, and I thought it was because the UK is a special place, as you know, linguistically. But in fact, it sort of surprised me that we have, with different degrees, similar challenges, and that is surprising and sad at the same time.
Thank you. Perhaps I can read a remark that is interesting. Michelle Norgate says, I think the issue about the future of online, hybrid and in-class language teaching needs to be looked at in the context of the increasing number of online translation, grammar, and so on tools that are available to students, both as future professional tools and as ways to cheat in assessments. I don't know if any of you wants to comment upon that.
Well, perhaps Michelle, she's from my language center. Michelle, you couldn't perhaps give more context. I've learned about the issue from you before. So
yeah, I just think that it's for me as a teacher, it's been I'm as running a team. It's been the last 18 months that these tools have really come into their own simultaneously with COVID. So I think 2 years ago, I didn't see DeepL as a threat at all, but having to go online and being unable to avoid cheating, I've seen a lot of uses of people, situations where students have written a text in German, put it into DeepL and handed it in as their own work written in English. And I just think that that's a real issue that needs to be considered to a large degree when we look at whether we should be teaching online, because you kind of lose the contact to the students, you lose the ability to assess whether they're actually handing in their own work if you don't know them so well through online. It's just a whole constellation. I think what for me is been important is the fact that the two things have happened simultaneously, COVID and the expansion of these tools. And I think you can't separate them when you look at these issues for the future.
Although maybe, if I may comment upon that, maybe it's also an opportunity for us to teach students about how to use these tools efficiently if they want to improve the quality of their English for their professional future, especially if you teach ESP, for example. If you teach English for specific purposes, you necessarily ask your students to give you ask them tasks that are related to the domain in which they study, and thus you can ask them to hand you over texts that are specific to their fields. And then the idea is that you assess the way they deal with their specialty using those tools. So perhaps it's an asset.
Absolutely, I totally agree, as long as you're not assessing them. But I think for me, the issue is that then, well, if I'm teaching someone how to write an academic text, which is what I do, I don't expect them to write it in German and just translate it online. I mean, how am I going to assess that? And so the thing is, we need to change our teaching fundamentally, not just in terms of whether it's online or hybrid. And for me now, we just don't have the tools. I'm going to be teaching how to edit texts, not how to write texts, if that's the case. And I think I agree with you completely that it's a fantastic opportunity, but we need time for this as well, not just for online teaching. So I think that's what makes the whole issue for me really complex. Because we don't have the materials, we don't have the tools, we don't have the time to start assessing, okay, how am I going to incorporate DeepL or Grammarly into my teaching? It's a completely different kettle of fish from what we've been doing so far, I think. But I agree with you, yeah.
This is something we could talk about, but we don't really have time here.
No, I know.
I can see that.
Two go hand in hand.
Two people want, Ursula, maybe?
I'm in the same language center as Sabina and Misha, and I just have a little add to yours. Bye-bye. I'm teaching beginners. What I see that people have the correcting program, so they have the German double S that we don't use in Switzerland, and all this stuff that goes to the side that I should teach technical stuff. You should take your autocorrection out. You do it like this, like that, because many just use it without knowing where to take it out. And sometimes I don't do it with bad purpose. And if my machine gives me the double S, why should I go back and say, okay, I do something else that students think that's correct, so they write it. And I think it would be much easier than to give all the lines, to give the rules, you should use the tools like this, like that, like that. Just take away the marks to say, okay, there's no assessment, there's no marks. You just do whatever you can, you work, and I give feedback. Yes. You give me whatever text you can write orthographically, completely wrong. If you dare to watch your sentence construction, that's what I want to get. And then they might do it. In the pressure of assessment, I have just to click here. It's 1 centimeter next to my whatever. It's so tough to not click that they're sitting all alone. Why should they have that discipline more to the discipline that they had already to come to class each time to do the homework, to what all that they could eat instead? They could lay in their pajama. And just not click that button. It's just a discipline thing. It could be done.
I agree.
I don't know.
Yeah. Totally agree. Yeah.
So if there's an option, what you say, mentioned, maybe change something in the bigger world, maybe offer 1 or 2 classes without marks. Why not? I would do that. Yeah, if that exists. I would love to teach without giving marks.
That again is very country specific.
Yeah. And it's not the way that nowadays, it's very much fashion.
I mean, our courses are not high stakes, but others are.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I wanted just to add. Okay. This little tool stuff. Yeah.
Thank you. I think Ruth would like to speak as well.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you very much, Ursula. And it's interesting because we're starting off in the same discussion a bit in Germany, if marks are still a good way of assessing language learning or learning itself, not only language learning. But I wanted to make another point, and I think what's really important for us to keep in mind for the future, and that came also in the comments I've seen, is really to describe what is special about our formats, our delivery formats, and what is different from a lecture, from a seminar, what we are doing, and what is still necessary in a language class that can't be done by IT systems, etc., because that will be the essential or the core subject of our language teaching. And I think that's something we really should reflect on in the future and see how this changed now from the COVID area to the post-COVID area, and what language classes are still about. Many times we're talking also about interaction, and I think interaction is not replaceable by IT support systems, etc., not in a way we as language teachers are providing this interaction, because we are not teaching knowledge, we're teaching skills. Yeah, and I think that's something, or not only teaching knowledge but also skills, and I think that's really an important point to be taken into consideration. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other question? I don't see any other comments or questions, so I don't know. Sabina, did you want to add something?
No, no. I would just to thank everybody, and we are going really to reflect also about afterwards about this webinar and how we are going to follow up some issues. And we are aware of the fact that it was, though it was selected results, it was still a lot of results. So you will always have the chance to go back to that. And yes, and I think it's really important for us to do something meaningful. And that's why we have to deepen the knowledge first, and then to discuss with you what we could develop. And yes, and thank you for your interest and joining us for this webinar. Thanks again to all the speakers, all the colleagues from the working group, and to Anne for chairing this webinar. And yes, I wish you, I wish you all the very best for some of you are still finishing teaching, and Germany still teaching is going on, or and some of them are marking, some of them are starting vacation. Anyway, I wish you a very nice vacation with lots of ways of recovering from a very, very, very intensive year. And yes, looking forward to meeting you at another CercleS events and occasion.